tiny airfield in a place called Harir in northern Iraq. This is, of course, a part of the world that is controlled not by Saddam Hussein, but by the Kurds, protected by that no-fly zone, that northern no-fly zone, which goes right about there. Let's zoom in and show you exactly where those paratroopers were headed toward as they jumped out in that dramatic fashion in the middle of the night. It's not much of an airfield, but it's really all that this group needs. And I want to bring in General Clark. There you see very rugged mountains along this area up in the Kurdish country. And right down here is that airstrip. That was their destination. As Brent Sadler told you, he has that airstrip in sight now. They're digging in around there, building their foxholes, hunkering down. This particular field will become a waypoint, a transit station, if you will. General Clark, how significant is it?
Well, I think it's a very significant action because it does insert our forces into the area. And we've needed them there, and now they're there.
What happens from here, though? Will this become a bustling base or just a transit point for infantry moves to the south? What will happen here?
For a while, it'll be a bustling base, Miles, and the troops will secure it. We'll start bringing in equipment there. We'll use it as what's called an airhead. Later, as the offensive rolls, we'll probably occupy a better airfield in one of the major cities that's still under Iraqi control. But that comes later. For now, this is the airhead.
I've got to ask you, as you look at these pictures, what goes through your mind as someone who has commanded troops in the field?
Well, two things. Number one, it's a great badge of honor. When you make a combat jump and you get a gold star on your jump wings, it's one of the greatest things that can happen to you as a soldier. Secondly, I feel bad for the guy that got tangled up in his equipment. I've seen it happen, and it's not pleasant.
Yeah, I did notice that. So I guess he had to go home, huh?
Don't know. I've seen him just roll out the door.
Really? Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh. Of course, we know that everybody landed safely there, but it's dramatic tape, and it really shows a lot of training and a lot of dedication, doesn't it?
It's a great unit. It's got a great tradition, and these are very well-trained soldiers. This was the U.S. European Command, U.S. Army Europe's reaction force.
Now, there are a couple other fields, as we go back to our satellite imagery, we can show you a couple of other fields that are of significance in this part of the world, in this Kurdish-controlled part of the world. This one, Al-Suleymaniye, and I probably didn't pronounce that entirely correctly, is another one that might be a focus of airborne troops in the future. We don't know for sure yet, though, do we, General Clark?
We don't. We don't know whether we'll have one and that'll be enough or we'll want another one.
And as we pull up, you can see the strategic significance of this. Of course, it's worth reminding our viewers it was hoped that Turkey would provide a passageway for the 4th Infantry, heavy ground troops to come through, and instead it's light airborne. And that does change the battle plan quite significantly. You see where we came from to where we're going there. That was where we were, and that's Baghdad. Obviously, that's a significant part of the world. How much does this set back Tommy Frank's plan?
Well, you know, not having the 4th Infantry Division up there in the north is probably let's just take a percentage figure, 30 to 40% problem at the outset. But now this force is going to change it, and it takes a little more time. It may have slowed them down a little bit, but not putting the 4th Infantry Division, it wasn't a decisive setback at all. And with the right kind of force here and putting the airborne troopers in and then bringing in heavy armor behind it, bringing in the rest of those reinforcing forces up from Kuwait, this plan will roll.
General Wesley Clark, we'll watch it roll with you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Aaron.
Miles, General, thank you very much. We take a short break. Our coverage continues in a minute.
So,
A remarkable hour and a half that we've spent with you since 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Among the things we want to gauge tonight is the mood in a couple of places. The United States, of course, and in Kuwait as well, because it's a part of the Arab community. It is an interesting spot. There's not always great comfort with the fact that there are a lot of American soldiers in the country. Causes some problems over there as well. Darren Kagan joins us now. She's been trying to get a sense of how the people in Kuwait are feeling, and she joins us from Kuwait City this morning. It's nice to see you again.
Good morning. Let me say good Thursday morning to you, Aaron, from here in Kuwait City. Keep in mind the border to Iraq, just about 50 miles over my shoulders there. Decided to head out yesterday and get a sense of how folks in Kuwait City are doing, if they're staying home, if they're heading back to the malls, back to the streets. Here's what we found. This is probably the only place in the Arab world where you'll see a demonstration in support of American and British troops. This is Kuwait. What's also significant about this scene from Tuesday night is that the people here now feel safe enough to leave their homes again. Kuwaitis are taking to the streets and taking back their lives. That also means getting back to everyday chores like going to the market. This is Sultan Center in Kuwait City. Picture a supermarket on the bottom floor, a department store on the top floor. Basically, if you need to buy it, they have it here. The store shelves are a welcome relief for Kuwaitis who have spent days glued to their television sets.
Actually, first 3 days I was scared. I was staying at home doing nothing, just gazing in the screen of the TV and this stuff, but not anymore. Not anymore. And I decided to go out, see my friends, sit in cafes, and come here, Sultan Center, shopping, this stuff, just to act normally.
Time to get back to your regular life.
Yeah, we need it.
Missile warning sirens are still a regular part of life here. Iraq has launched at least 12 missiles at Kuwait since the war started. Most were shot down by Patriot missiles. Others fell into the desert or the sea. The threat, though, doesn't seem to faze the people we talked with. So you don't even go to a shelter at this point or anything?
Nothing.
But those are real missiles that are coming in. Those aren't just false alarms.
Yeah, I mean, whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and I think we're taken good care of.
The first 2 days I was at work and they were at home, so the first thing that I did, I called them and told them to make sure that they go downstairs and they will be beneath the stairway, and that's where we have our area. But then we began to be more comfortable with it. Basically, we're not panicking, and they were doing a good job, the girls.
Another sign that life is getting back to normal. These girls will head back to school on Saturday after a week off due to the war. The Kuwait Department of the Interior says more than 50,000 people left the country in anticipation of the war, but with life getting back to normal, some are beginning to come back. That won't be hard. By last Thursday, almost all commercial airlines had stopped flying in and out of here, but now airport traffic is almost back to normal, even with warplanes dropping bombs just across the border. When we say that airport traffic is back to normal, I want to clarify there. All the airlines are not flying in and out of here yet, Aaron. The European airlines have not chosen to start up their service, but number of flights and airport traffic is back up to normal. Also, one other note, in the media here, you can see some people like political scientists coming out and being critical of the war, the speed of the war, saying this was supposed to go a lot more quickly. But just from what I found on going out into the streets and the stores, I couldn't find a single Kuwaiti who would express that, saying they're comfortable with how it's going and, as you can see, comfortable in getting back to their everyday lives.
In terms of what we can see, we ought to explain that which we can and cannot see. It looks a little less sandy today behind you than it was 24 hours ago. We can just make out the towers.
You can. Okay. Yes, it is better, and I think you can definitely tell it's not blowing as much, but we do get word that another sandstorm could be on its way within the next couple hours. So stay tuned for that. If it happens, we'll show it to you here live from Kuwait City.
Darren, thank you. You'll be with us a lot too the next couple of hours. Thank you very much. On the subject of mood and how people are feeling about things, double duty tonight for our senior political analyst, Bill Schneider. He's here to talk about British opinion, what it means to Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister who meets with the President, and also and first where this country is, where the United States is now a week into the war, and it's in a couple of interesting places, I think.
Yes, it is. Darren mentioned just now that the Kuwaitis, many of them were expecting a quick war. Some Americans were too. And after an initial day of euphoria in the United States, a mood of sober realism set in. And you can see it in these poll numbers day by day over the last 4 days. On Saturday, 62% of Americans said the United States, the war was going very well so far. That dropped to 44% on Sunday and down to 32% and 37% Monday and Tuesday.
Now, perhaps this will be helpful. Up until Saturday, what we had seen essentially was the race into Iraq.
Yes.
What we saw on Sunday were casualties and POWs. Now, if we can just put the numbers up again to look at what one day's news cycle did to people's perception, is pretty dramatic to me. I mean, you're not talking about a little onesie here and a twosie there. That's a big drop.
That is a big drop. But here's something that did not drop in line with those numbers: morale. We asked people each of those days, do you support war with Iraq? And these numbers vary very little. You see on Saturday it was 74, Sunday a few points lower, 70, Monday 69, Tuesday back up to 73. What that suggests is on the home front in the United States, even though people feel the war is a lot slower than they'd like, a mood of sober realism has set in, the home front morale is holding up. You know, Aaron, there's this theory that as body bags begin to come in, Americans will lose faith in the war, that will destroy home front morale. That really isn't true. What really destroys home front morale and creates a problem for any military venture like this is the sense that there isn't a clear mission and there's no strategy for achieving that mission. That was the problem in Vietnam and even more the problem in Somalia. It doesn't seem to be a problem with this war where Americans see a mission and a strategy.
And you'll forgive me if I just say again, 1 week into the war. In the same way that I think it's a little wacky to be making broad criticisms of the war plan a week into the war. It's probably, you know this polling stuff far better than I don't want to seem like an expert here, I'm not. But we're a week into it, there's been an incredible concentration of coverage. People have been incredibly focused on it. I guess in my mind, am pretty cautious about how to read any of this, except the daily swings seem to be tied to the news cycle.
And let me give you an example. When we asked people, do you think going into this war was a mistake, the answer was exactly the same as we got back in 1965 when Americans made a major troop commitment in Vietnam. You know how long it took a majority of Americans to decide that Vietnam was a mistake? 3 years.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the middle of 1968, 3 years later, that Americans finally decided this wasn't a good idea.
Now, the British Prime Minister is in town, and we were talking earlier this evening that in all of this, the last several months, Tony Blair has been among the most interesting characters because he has been so steadfast despite public opinion in this country, which was extremely negative.
Well, the question is, what drives Tony Blair? Why is he one of the few world leaders to risk his political career to stand shoulder to shoulder with President Bush?
Tony Blair and Bill Clinton? That's easy to get. Skilled politicians leading left-of-center parties. But Tony Blair and George W. Bush, what's that about? It's not about ideology. Blair and Bush have vastly different political values. It doesn't seem to be personal. In background, style, and personality, the two leaders have nothing in common. Well, almost nothing.
Well, we both use Colgate toothpaste.
Blair's alliance with Bush seems to endanger his own political interests. Sure, other world leaders support Bush, but they're conservatives like President Aznar of Spain and President Berlusconi of Italy. The war is not popular in Blair's Labour Party.
We should not go in that direction.
Blair has long been seen as a calculating, poll-driven politician, not a man of conviction. But every poll before this week showed war with Iraq was widely unpopular in Britain. Blair bravely confronted his critics. In the end, Blair took his country into war, and look at what happened. The polls turned around in Blair's favor. Instead of being led by the polls, Blair led the polls. Maybe Blair is a man of conviction. He sees Britain's national security as inextricably linked to the United States.
Many Europeans would like to see Europe divided from the United States, a check on U.S. power, a Europe, in effect, united by anti-Americanism. Blair is convinced that that's dangerous, and by joining with Bush, he has set out to make sure it doesn't happen.
And he finds himself this week in a position of trying to bridge a gap in some respects between the strong feelings of the continent and the equally strong feelings of the American president.
That's right. He is against the idea that France will lead a new united Europe, which is basically setting itself up to be the check on American power. He thinks that's a disaster because Europe really has no military power.
Now, I want to go back just for a minute here before we go to break. In breaking out the polling, there's one
Yeah.
Well, there's probably more than one. We saw a significant disparity between Democrats and Republicans, but even a more dramatic disparity in another area.
That's right. What we saw is a very sharp decline in support for this war among African Americans. If you compare their support for the Gulf War in 1991, it was 60%, and now their support for the war in Iraq is down to 30%. Among whites, the level of support is almost exactly the same. I think that difference, that 30%, that low figure, has a lot to do with African Americans' hostility to President Bush. A lot of blacks suspect, since they don't see an overwhelmingly convincing reason for this war, they suspect that the war is being fought for political reasons because they see Bush as driven by political calculation.
And African Americans, about 9% of the vote, the president's vote in the last election was an African American vote.
Actually, 9% of African Americans voted for him.
Yes.
And he's setting out, he has major foreign policy advisors. His Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor are both African Americans. That doesn't seem to have made any difference.
Bill, thank you very much.
Sure.
Come back again soon. Bill Schneider, our senior political analyst. We'll take a break. Our coverage continues in a moment.
The war in Iraq continues, and no one takes you closer than CNN, live throughout the day. Stay with CNN, the most trusted name in news. Name in news.
Heading toward midnight here in the East. We're glad you're with us again tonight. General Wesley Clark is with us too. General, I just want to go back and look at those paratroopers a second. Have you ever been in one of those planes when that's going on?
Yes, I have.
What's it like? What's it sound like? What's it feel like?
Well, first of all, everybody sleeps on the way to the drop zone.
How do they sleep?
You're strapped in, you can't move, you got tons of equipment on, and you learn to sleep. When there's nothing else you can do, you sleep. It may be the last chance to get some good rest. You're probably tired and worn out from trying to get ready and sitting around, and you're just glad to get on the airplane.
Have do they eat just before they get on the plane? And I mean, I guess I want to know all the detail of what it's like.
I don't know what this particular timeline would be.
Are there seats on the plane, or are they
there's sort of canvas bench seats on the aircraft. I'm not sure on this aircraft. That's probably what it is. They're usually rigged that way because you got to have enough space that you can get all your gear. You got the kit bag in front of you. You've got your parachute on, you've got your reserve chute, you've got your combat gear. And you got your helmet, of course, and it's uncomfortable.
And then they almost seem to be racing to the door, just coming down that line, racing to jump out, one after another. Is it noisy? Are they obviously the wind's blowing through?
It's noisy, but you don't hear anything. You do a drill, stand up, you hook up, and it is a set count. You check equipment, you count down, and people are touching the guy in front of you. You're back to belly in this thing, and when it starts moving, you start your feet moving, and the whole, we call it a stick, which is the line of people coming out that door, starts moving from the back, and you're going out that door. I mean, it's pushed because the plane's moving at a certain rate of speed, and the faster you can get people out that door, the closer they're concentrated on the ground, which helps in the defense, it helps in forming up the unit afterwards, and so you want to get everybody out as rapidly as possible.
Now, it's pitch black out there. The one thing that First Sergeant Geringer said, I said, you've probably done this 100 times or dozens of times in training. Was it any different? Now, he was a sergeant, and he knows how to answer these sorts of questions, to be honest, but he said, no, it's just like we trained it all the time. That must have made a guy like you burst with pride.
Well, I'm really proud of those guys.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, it's a great privilege to be in the airborne. A lot of people want it. It's tough to get in there. I was an armor officer, and so there was just a very small slice of people who could do this.
What is happening here, this sort of clump of... Can we lose the banner a second? I'm not sure if we can do this quickly enough, but what is all that?
Looks like the ripcord's being, that's the top of the parachute. The parachute's attached to a wire inside the aircraft. And the wire actually opens the parachute and it leaves the cover attached to the wire. And so that's the remains of the parachutes being pulled back in the aircraft.
What's up? Thank you. That whole sequence was unbelievable. As we say a lot, we know some of you don't normally watch the Newsnight program. Newsnight has this great affection for still photos, and another view of the war now seen through the lens of Time magazine photographer Christopher Morris. Chris is traveling with the 3rd Infantry Division, 3rd Brigade. Some of the pictures you're about to see will appear in the next issue of Time magazine, next week's issue. He spoke with us on a satellite phone after an exhausting day in central Iraq.
Christopher Morris, working for Time magazine with the 3rd Infantry Division. I'm in central Iraq, somewhere moving north, that's all I can really say. The soldiers, they have high morale. They feel they have a job to do. They've been moving since we crossed over from Kuwait. He was accused of being a soldier. He was pulled away with the people he was traveling with because he was wearing green army pants. And they arrested him, they detained him, and they sent the vehicle with all the people he was traveling with. They turned them back, made them go away. And when he realized, that was when he was realizing that he was being arrested and the people he was with were being taken away. The last couple of days with this route security, we slowed down a little, but yesterday there was a storm on like biblical proportions. You really felt like you were on the red planet. The winds were almost hurricane force, they felt, with the sand, and then the rain came. Several of the soldiers I was with said it was the worst night they've ever had in the Army. There was also at one point where there were 10 Iraqis supposedly with RPGs and guns that were approaching our side, trying to flank us where we were on the side of the road. So a patrol went out to try to find them. And at one point, a farmer's vehicle approached with a farmer and his two, I'm not sure of the relationship, but there was a young boy, a 4-year-old boy in the car. But the soldiers came at the car, and basically removed them from the car. And what struck me is the fear on these people's face. The young boy was visibly shaken. He put his hands in the air. And just, that was the most poignant thing, at least that I saw in the last day or so, outside of the weather. They're very unprepared to deal with the culture that they're entering. They haven't been prepared in that sense. They've been prepared how to fight, but they haven't been prepared, I feel, where they're fighting. By the questions they ask at the checkpoints, and they're not in Missouri, they're not in Arkansas, they're in Iraq. And originally there was this real suspicion because everybody they pulled out of the cars had large wads of money in their pockets. And the American soldiers at first thought that was very suspicious, like they would have big wads of money, but they don't realize that the exchange rate is like 12,000 to the dollar. So basically they're pulling out of, these people maybe have $3 or $4 in their pockets. To these American soldiers, it looked like they had hundreds of dollars. Everybody's on a high state of alert. So I think they understand where they are and the dangers that lie ahead for them. Yes, absolutely.
Christopher Morris, shooting pictures for Time magazine. We said yesterday we benefit enormously by our relationship with the New York Times. We benefit enormously by our relationship with Time magazine as well. What a spectacular set of pictures we saw there. Short break, our coverage continues.
It's been 140 years since we began crossing this land. In that time, we've used more than our share of ingenuity and tenacity to build a company and a nation. And together, we've overcome challenges the size of mountains.
How do you invest to help secure your future? You start with your dreams. And Edward Jones.
My life, my world, it all begins with a dream.
Edward Jones.
Smart Balance Buttery Spreads, judged the best tasting in the soft vegetable spread category by the American Tasting Institute, helps to improve the ratio of good to bad cholesterol with no trans fatty acids and no hydrogenated oil. Use delicious Smart Balance Buttery Spreads.
CNN puts you alongside the troops.
I'll tell you about the two main things that the strike fighters are dealing with.
There goes a plane taking off now. More reporters in the region to keep you informed. No one gets you closer than CNN, the most trusted name in news.
I'm Darren Kagan, live in Kuwait City, where it is 8 a.m. on Thursday morning. Let's take a look at the latest headlines this hour. The Washington Post reporting some sharp divisions among top U.S. military officials. The paper quotes unnamed senior military officers who say Iraq is putting up a significantly stiffer resistance than expected, and that the war is likely to last for months. President Bush today warned that the war may not be as short as some expect, but he and his top military leaders have downplayed suggestions that the war is going significantly differently than planned. Tonight, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff told CNN that Iraqis have executed American POWs. Iraq had said it would abide by the Geneva Convention. On the battlefield overnight, one of the biggest U.S. airdrops in a decade. You're looking at exclusive new video from that operation. 1,000 paratroopers secured an airfield which may be used to help open a northern front. Our Brent Sadler reports there have been additional airdrops within the last hour. In the U.S., a familiar voice from decades of political debate has gone silent. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the former Democratic senator from New York and ambassador to the UN, died on Wednesday. He had suffered an infection after an emergency appendectomy. Moynihan was 76. A federal court has blocked the Miami family of Elian Gonzalez from suing former federal officials. The suit claimed that former Attorney General Janet Reno and others in the Justice Department caused agents in the field to act unlawfully when they seized Elian 3 years ago. He was returned to his father in Cuba. The court said Reno and other officials issued their orders with the expectation that field agents would act in a lawful manner. And with that, we toss it back to Aaron Brown with our continuing coverage of the war in Iraq. Aaron?
Thank you very much, Darren. Darren will be with us for the rest of the way here, next couple of hours, keeping us on top of the events. The headlines of the day, we're just going to check something that was just disquieting in regarding the POWs and try and get down to what that was, because my head snapped back on that. Darren just gave you the short view of how the day has gone and where we are. Here's a broader picture of the day that unfolded.
Moving by night over unfamiliar ground, coalition ground forces continued their march toward Baghdad. The Bush administration saying it will not change its strategy of aiming for the heart of the Iraqi regime.
We have air dominance. We have special forces in the north, the south, and the west. The main ground forces are moving at a phenomenal pace toward the north, closing in on Baghdad.
As best we can tell, here is the situation on the ground. A major ground battle is believed to be brewing between American and Iraqi tanks near the city of Najaf, not far from where the American 7th Cavalry lost 2 of its Abrams tanks, but no soldiers, in a firefight last night. The Americans have already taken a key bridge over the Euphrates River.
As they approach Baghdad, our fighting units are facing the most desperate elements of a doomed regime. We cannot know the duration of this war, but we are prepared for the battle ahead.
Hundreds of American paratroopers landed at an airfield in Kurdish-controlled parts of northern Iraq. Meantime, badly needed supplies of fuel and food reached elements of the 7th Marine in south-central Iraq, and British units were still involved in house-to-house clearing operations inside the city of Qasr. Refugees could be seen outside of Basra, where explosions lit up the night sky. Supplies of food finally reaching the Iraqi village of Safwan, where there was a near riot during its distribution. Iraqi television, knocked off the air last night for several hours, was back on today, showing footage of casualties and severe damage in a busy Baghdad market. But American officials insist they did not send a missile crashing into the area. And finally, the Pentagon says it is still checking reports that as many as 7 American prisoners were executed after their supply convoy was ambushed not far from the city of Nasiriyah.
And I think what we're trying to make sure of is that the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs was referring to that when he talked to Larry King tonight, and we're just trying to sort that out just to be sure. That's what happened. Here's what's happening. Christiane Amanpour joins us now. She's with the British forces on the road to Basra. Christiane, it's nice to see you this morning. Good morning to you.
The latest from here militarily is that, and that is coming out of CENTCOM in Doha, Qatar, that this big column of Iraqi vehicles, something up to 120 we're told, 70 or so of those may have been Iraqi tanks, burst out of Basra towards the south. They don't know exactly why. They say it looked like it was in offensive position and it went down south. We're told that US air power took on that column, and we're told some of those vehicles were destroyed. The others, we're told, were dispersed. Again, we don't know what the Iraqis were doing, but the speculation could be that they were trying to retake the Fao Peninsula, the big important oil terminal area of Iraq in the southern part of the country, which was taken early by the British early on in the ground offensive. So Iraq still putting up resistance, much stiffer than expected, certainly in the southern area, certainly around Basra. The British and the Iraqi army units, which are inside Basra, have been exchanging artillery and tank fire, and now the British tell us that this could go on for weeks and maybe even months if they find themselves besieging Basra and in, quote, a classic counterinsurgency posture. In other words, having to go in and try to take out those pockets of Iraqi military and irregular resistance inside the town, and trying at the same time to take care not to cause too much civilian damage. Now, what we're being told is that the British are trying to remove and separate the political structure from the civilians, because what they want the civilians in Basra to do is have the space to, quote, rise up. And so what they're trying to do is take out the ruling party headquarters, the Ba'ath Party headquarters. They say they have done that in Zubair, which is south of Basra, and also in Basra itself. And that, they say, is also where the command and control centers are for the irregular forces, which are also taking on the British and, we understand, controlling the population inside Basra. Now, there's also a humanitarian situation going on. We've been hearing a lot of reports that people are hungry, people are thirsty. Water is a big issue inside Basra as well as in the surrounding areas. People say that there's not enough water and they're very thirsty and they need water. And to that end, some humanitarian aid has been delivered. For instance, in the town of Safwan, which again is further south, closer to the Iraqi border, some trucks were brought in and people were really jumping all over those trucks to get the water and whatever aid was being delivered. There have been some convoys of aid, again low-level aid, packets and boxes of water and food also taken into the port area of Qasr, and we are expecting later today the big British ship to dock in Qasr and start unloading much more significant quantities of aid. Back to you.
Christiane, stay with us, but let me bring General Clark into this. You hear that sort of reporting, that they start talking about months, counterinsurgency. This is asymmetrical warfare of a sort. What's running through your mind?
Need to stay steady. It might take months, but it probably won't. The real unknown here is how hard the Iraqis can fight and whether they can sustain this kind of resistance. If they do, then we clearly need more forces. But that hasn't been proved yet. And this is still a terrain that favors U.S. air power, except in the cities. And, you know, we'll tighten the grip on this, and then we'll see. It may not last months.
Christiane, give you the last word on this.
Well, indeed, we're not saying that it will. We're saying that this is what they're sort of cautioning us.
Right.
Don't expect this to happen overnight, and particularly around these urban areas where they have to be very careful, because they're not only just trying to win the population over, they obviously physically don't want to kill civilians as they try to stamp out this Iraqi resistance. But the bottom line is, and this is emerging very clearly across the battlefield, whether it be in the British sector or in the American sector, that the resistance is much stiffer stiffer than people had expected and much stiffer than politicians and the others had given the impression before the war started. We've heard umpteen anecdotes and conversations and interviews from soldiers, whether it be with the embedded reporters or whether it be in our experience. They're all saying that while we can cope with this, we have much superior firepower and experience, this is much stiffer resistance than we expected. And I'm curious to know whether General Clark thinks that the original suggestions that this kind of land war could have been conducted with perhaps 60,000 forces on the ground was maybe optimistic in the extreme.
Absolutely optimistic in the extreme. The point is that any bold operation has risk, and why would we want to take risk when we have the forces? We should put the forces in that we need. We should put in the extra forces for the insurance policy, and we should recognize the enemy, as Michael Gordon said tonight, and we keep saying the enemy has a vote on what's going to happen here. And of course he's going to try to resist it. If he's successful, he's going to resist more strongly because he's going to be encouraged by his early successes.
Christian, thank you. I know well, hopefully we'll hear from you before we leave tonight, but thank you. Christian Amanpour, who's moving with the British. It's not only that the enemy has a vote in this, it seems to me, General, it's that the enemy has a plan in this.
I think you're right.
That the Iraqis, whatever they did or did not do 12 years ago, they were overwhelmed by American air power, this pounding they took for week after week, and then they were sort of routed in a heartbeat on the ground. And there was, I think, a sense, and we remember something that a helicopter pilot told us in Iraq, in Kuwait a month ago. He said, well, 12 years ago, we thought they were really good. We don't think that anymore. Well, whether they're good or not remains to be seen, but clearly they had a plan to make this as difficult by forcing the coalition forces into places they did not want to go, cities.
Right. And, you know, they may not be as good as they were, but good at what? In terms of resisting in cities, their cities, with a Stalinist regime, and we've been saying this is a Stalinist regime with a strong secret police. Well, that's what put up the fierce resistance in World War II to the German invasion of Russia.
And I was looking at the transcript of the interview that Larry King did with Marine General Peter Pace. They also, according to the coalition, they're not unwilling to do some pretty dastardly things, use civilians as shields. We saw weapons hidden in hospitals. They're not playing fair in that regard, but those are the conditions that the coalition finds itself in.
Well, fair is the way you fight when your survival is not at stake. For this Saddam regime, their survival is at stake. They're going to do everything in their power that's necessary to maintain that survival.
On that sobering note, we'll take a break. Our coverage continues in a moment.
How old do you have to be to run away from home? 8? 68? Somewhere in between? What would you take with you? And where would you go if you could go anywhere? We have a lot of places to explore out there. The kind of places that require a map and a friend. There are over 4 million miles of roads in Alamo country, and with values like this, they're easy to explore. Alamo, the official rental car of the American vacation.
Good morning. Before we start, if everyone could move page 15 2 pages up in the deck. And if your page 5 is fuzzy, just pass it down.
Unprofessional documents.
Page 8.
Lead to messy meetings.
Just remove it.
But at Staples, you'll get professional quality copying and printing. Our certified associates and 3-step quality process make sure your job is done right.
And this goes up.
Quality copying and printing. Staples. That was easy.
CNN puts you alongside the troops.
We are here just behind the front line.
More reporters in the region to keep you informed. No one gets you closer than CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Later in this hour, we'll hear from Tom Friedman, the columnist for the New York Times, and one of the really smart people on the region that we are reporting on now. Over to the Pentagon, and Chris Plant has the duty, and there's a lot to report out of there. The Defense Secretary today said we are, just to pick up on the General's point, the United States is putting more forces in every day, and in his word, not a trivial number either.
Well, that's right, Aaron. And in northern Iraq, as we're seeing from some of our people up there, the Army has dropped 1,000 or so paratroopers into the town of Bashur in the Kurdish-controlled areas in northeastern Iraq to take over an airfield there. We're seeing here some exclusive CNN video of these paratroopers actually dropping into the zone in Bashur in northeastern Iraq there. 1,000 in earlier today, last night their time. And more coming in. They've taken the airfield so they can flow more troops in to open up a northern front, which was part of the original plan when the 4th Infantry Division was going to move in through Turkey. 4th Infantry Division, about 20,000 strong, was going to open up that northern front. Now they've kind of gone on to an alternate plan while the equipment belonging to the 4th Infantry Division is being moved through the Suez Canal and down the Red Sea. It's going to come back up into the Persian Gulf and into Kuwait. Those 20,000 or so troops will be moved into Kuwait soon, within a matter of days, and they will marry up, as they say, with their equipment in Kuwait and join the fight from the south, which was not the original plan, as I think we all know at this point, but another division coming in to help from the south, and northern front being opened now by paratroopers, but once they secure an airfield, they'll have the ability to flow troops in with transport aircraft and equipment and so on for the opening of that front up there. So they do want to spread the Iraqi troops as thin as they can and force them to address issues to their north as well as their south. As we know, I think the plan has evolved from the beginning. The U.S. says that they're on schedule and they're going according to plan, but certainly the plan has made some adjustments along the way, regardless. Aaron?
Well, what people say when they stand at the podium is policy, and it's important for them to put the best face on the moment, and that we understand and appreciate. Do you hear any grumbling in the hallways? Because the Washington Post is reporting, as I'm sure you know, that there's now some grumbling in the hallways that this thing is going to take months, and that it certainly has not gone as well as anticipated.
Well, it's there's not a lot of grumbling. There might be a little bit of murmuring, perhaps. What's below grumbling? But people are looking at the situation. It's clear that the resistance in the south is a little more persistent than was expected. Again, no organized opposition in terms of Iraqi divisions taking on American and British units head on, but a lot of this guerrilla-style asymmetric warfare. It is slowing things up a bit. As you mentioned a few minutes ago, the situation in Basra is taking up troops and time that they had not wanted to expend on these urban areas. They had more or less planned on bypassing these urban areas and going straight up north to Baghdad and making that the place where we squared off. It's war. And as they like to say here, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and that appears to be the case here. Again, the generals here insist that they are on plan, that the timetable is moving along as they wanted it to, but certainly it's turned out to be a bit more complicated than many had originally expected.
Chris, thank you. Chris Plant at the Pentagon. No organized opposition. It seems to me, depends what you mean by the word organized, because there's clearly a plan. Somebody organized that.
That's right. No, there are divisions in there. There are units of the chain of command in there. They're just not maneuvering on the battlefield. It's thrown us off because I think we still expected the Iraqis to fight like they fought in 1991, where you could see the structure laid out in the Soviet-style defense. Well, they're fighting in cities. They've got their own defense in the cities. It's not going to look the same way it did in 91, but we shouldn't think it's not organized. It's definitely organized.
But it's just the point, it seems to me it's the point we made a little bit ago that as the American generals learn from each experience, so too do the Iraqi generals learn. They learn what went wrong in 1991. It may be that they can't affect the end result, and it is probably true they can't affect the end result, but they can sure alter the timetable for the end result, and maybe, in their view, they can get enough international pressure on the United States and the British to end this before they get Saddam Hussein out of power. That almost certainly has to be the plan.
Of course, it's an integrated political military strategy in which Al Jazeera and the Iraqi news and so forth plays a key part in portraying the success of the Iraqi resistance and builds international support to try to halt the American and British war effort.
We'll take a break here. When we come back, a reporter's journal, Dr. Sanjay Gupta's journal through this first week of the war. A break first. CNN's coverage of the war in Iraq continues in a moment.
Hey, you're going to love this new quick rent at National Car Rental. When you get to the airport, they let you choose your own car. Whatever make and model you want.
Whatever color you want.
You can walk right past the counter. And you don't stand in any lines.
All you need is a major credit card and access to the internet. You rent online at nationalcar.com.
They ought to call it quick and easy.
Bypass the counter.
You don't have to stand in line. Choose your own car. Click, click, click on the computer.
It's all about me, Rent. Huh?
Choose the rental car company that lets you choose your own car. Quick rent at nationalcar.com.
Someday, it all pays off. When you face the challenges and you've made the right moves. Through it all, Prudential Financial is there. Because when it comes to your financial security, having the right partner can mean everything. Prudential Financial, growing and protecting your wealth.
An hour and a half or so ago, Don Hewitt was with us. Mr. Hewitt, among the people who invented this form and television news, and he talked about watching these reporters, these embedded reporters from our network and all of the other networks, watching them perform their tasks in the field. We have asked our embedded reporters to help us prepare journals or diaries of their first week of covering this with the access that they've had. Tonight, a journal, if you will, from Dr. Sanjay Gupta.
In the middle of the desert of northern Kuwait, the U.S. military is going over their ABCs.
We started back in February, several weeks ago, really looking at medical preparedness. We knew this was going to be a different sort of conflict. Chemical and biological weapons were being discussed like never before, and how the troops were preparing back then was an important story. Where are you from back home?
Arizona.
Arizona. All right, thank you very much for joining us. Back to you. We're going to be joining this convoy for a 3-mile-long convoy supplying some of the forces in Iraq. We ended up in northern Kuwait in the desert for some time, and then ended up on a convoy, a multiple vehicle convoy, 89 vehicles, 3 miles long. They told us it'd take about 5 hours to get to the location where we were going to get. It took 17. The conditions since we've been in Iraq have not been exactly what you'd call 5-star. We have slept under the stars in sleeping bags. We have slept by a bunker just so that we could jump in it because there were so many times that the alarms would sound in the middle of the night. We have slept in the back of a huge truck traveling through sniper-infested areas of Iraq. We don't have bathrooms out here. We don't have showers. I haven't showered in 7 days now, and it probably shows.
This is the 4th bunker call in as many hours. As you can see, we're wearing our masks, our Kevlar, and our helmets. That's because we're instructed to do so, as we're instructed also to be here in this bunker.
I'm used to being in the studio, wearing a suit on the set, but this has been obviously a huge change for me. And people keep telling me that we're surprised that you're out there. Well, I can assure you no one is more surprised than I am. We are here just behind the front line in an FRSS, Frontline Resuscitative Surgical Suite. Right behind me, for the first time ever, an operation has been done on the abdomen for a gunshot wound. There's dust and sand blowing everywhere, yet they're able to keep these operating rooms clean. They're able to do operations. We've seen them do it now, 4 or 5 operations just over the last couple of days. And as soon as they found out that I was a neurosurgeon, they immediately said to me, well, if we get any head injuries, we're calling you. Bottom line, we can't take care of those things here. And I thought that was sort of an interesting thing to say, and certainly made me feel welcome and that I would actually jump in, volunteer, and help out in any way that I could. I felt both medically and morally responsible to do just that. I haven't had to.
A little while ago, a few hours ago, we were told to hunker down, put on all of our gear, and get down. There had been a breach of a company-sized convoy actually heading our way and apparently breached the perimeter.
You have to be scared if you're here. We are seeing Marines killed in action. We are hearing about possible chemical and biological stuff. Absolutely, we're scared. I'll be honest and say that this is probably a more dangerous sort of story to follow than I thought. I think most of the doctors that we've spoken with think they're a little bit busier than they expected to be, and certainly operating on more Iraqis than they expected to be, but it really comes in spurts. We're just going to have to wait and see how it all plays out. We have been really pleased with the stories we've been able to tell. I think that's what makes it worthwhile. We're getting the truth out there. We're getting the truth about how people take care of their fallen comrades, how they take care of the Iraqi soldiers as well, how that all happens. We not only get to tell that story, but we get to see it firsthand. We get to be a part of it. I mean, I think that's part of the embedding process too, to not only just do the stories, but to know what it's like for the people that you're doing the stories on.
Sanjay, you're on your way south toward Kuwait by telephone. What's happening where you are?
Hey, Bill, yeah, we're in a convoy of about 20 vehicles. All the Marines have their guns out, pointed outwards at all times, really throughout this several-hour ride. Now, we're having no trouble right now traveling through southern Iraq.
We have a special guest now, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, our CNN medical correspondent, just back from the field. You've been to Iraq. You're now back. You haven't taken a shower in 9 days, but you look pretty good. Why are you here instead of with the devil docs, those Navy doctors you've been reporting from all this time?
Yeah, well, you know, Wolf, the story we were trying to get was really to understand how medical care is given in the field. Starting with the front line, which we showed, you know, these operating rooms in the field, right at the front line. We want to follow these patients back now, all the way back to definitive care on the rare line, and even maybe back to the USS Comfort. That's where we're going to try and head next. Some of the patients, in fact, that we saw get their operations are already to USNS Comfort, so we were hoping to catch up with them, really follow their whole progress.
Sanjay Gupta's journal. Dr. Gupta is a doctor. He's a trained neurosurgeon, and he has had a fascinating reporting experience, and now that he'll go out to the USS Comfort and follow those patients the rest of the way. General, do you want to take a minute? You want to explain event-driven planning in a minute, or do you want more time to do that?
No, I'd love to do it right now.
All right, go ahead.
You know,
we've been talking about this.
If you've been with us from the start of the program, you heard Jamie McIntyre talk about this discrepancy, and you've heard others talk about, you know, when is the plan off track? And the Pentagon says it's on track, and others say it's off track. Well, the simple point is that in planning like this, you don't have timelines for the operation. You have events that drive the movement from one phase to another. So it's the timelines are flexible depending on what happens on the ground. So you could say phase one was when we occupied Kuwait and set the force, and phase one ended when the bombing started and the ground movement started. And then you say phase two is, well, you're moving up to Baghdad, and phase two will end when you get the force set in Baghdad and you commence your ground attack on the Republican Guard in Baghdad. Now that's flexible. So it could take, you know, a week, it could take 2 weeks, it could take 2 months. And so they're still on track with the concept of the plan and the phasing. It's just that the political assumptions have been a little bit too optimistic, at least as we understood them publicly, and the timeline will slip. But it doesn't mean they're conceptually off the plan. I know that sounds like doublespeak, but...
All right, I'll play this game. That's rhetorical to a certain extent. It's absolutely correct that it's in the same way. Okay, it's absolutely correct. However, it is also correct to say, I believe, that things have happened on the ground that were unanticipated, that the resistance was stronger, that the tactic was different, that the assumption that there'd be a population uprising in certain places that would allow the plan to move from step to step to step at a certain pace has not taken place. That, for the sake of argument here, I think is also true. So both things can be true.
That's exactly right. And so that's what I was trying to convey, is that the military is not necessarily, they are trying to put the best face on things, of course, because they're in the public relations business just like Saddam Hussein is. And they want people to believe in our ability to do this job. And things have changed, but they haven't changed. So, for example, if you had a huge Iraqi counterattack that defeated the 3rd Infantry Division and you fell back and you had to say, new phase, now it's the defense of Kuwait. Okay, well, then your plan's been invalidated. Otherwise, it's just sort of stretched out.
And it's a little stretched out. Now we'll take a break. Our coverage continues in 1 minute.
Whether you're on a straightaway or a twisted road, Kumho's always ready for the unexpected. Design technology, Kumho.
CNN Tomorrow, overnight developments of battles with live reports from the front lines, plus one U.S. Marine's mother's surprising personal battle against the war on the next American Morning with Paul Zahn. CNN Tomorrow, 7 a.m. Eastern.
I'm Darren Kagan, live in Kuwait City with the latest developments, beginning with U.S. forces who have secured an airfield in Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq. 1,000 troops from the 173rd Airborne parachuted into the area under the cover of darkness. They met no resistance. The airfield will be a staging area for a northern front against Saddam Hussein. One of the paratroopers described the nighttime jump to Aaron Brown.
For me, I was fortunate enough to be a jump master, and I got to stand in the door for about 3 minutes and watch the approach in. And as I exited jumpers out, it was an incredible feeling of adrenaline to see those paratroopers leave the doors, and for me to leave after them and then see the chutes in the air. So it was quite invigorating.
Coalition aircraft hit Iraqi positions near Kalak on Thursday morning. Our Ben Wiedemann says 2 separate explosions could be seen near a Kurdish-controlled area. Anti-aircraft fire could be seen in the skies over Baghdad early on Thursday, and smoke and explosions were seen and heard in the city overnight. The coalition continued trying to secure the city of Nasiriyah, a key crossing over the Euphrates River. There was heavy shelling into Iraqi lines by U.S. and British forces. In Nasiriyah, U.S. Marines found a chilling mural in the Iraqi military headquarters. It shows a plane crashing into a high-rise building that resembles the World Trade Center towers. The plane depicted hitting the high-rise building, and it had an Iraqi airline logo. Around the world now, more anti-war protests. In Madrid, thousands of students took to the streets and called for the resignation of Spain's government, which supports the war. The protests turned violent in several places. In Egypt, several thousand students gathered to protest on the campus of Cairo University, but police did not allow them to march into the city. And those are the latest developments at this hour. You're watching CNN, the most trusted name in news. Now back to Aaron at CNN World Headquarters.
Darren, thank you. Maybe after the top of the hour, we take a look at the morning papers. The headlines in Kuwait. We can't do it here tonight because we ran out of printer paper.